It happened in a flash. A little girl, a raised hand, a question no one saw coming. What does God mean to you? And just like that, the room stopped breathing. The air turned thick. The lights felt hotter. Every eye turned toward the front. Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett, seated in her Capitol Hill blouse, froze. She'd handled interrogations from Senate chambers. She'd stood firm under national cameras. But this wasn't policy. It was personal. The question didn't just land. It split something wide open. The kind of question that yanks you back in time to a hot hallway in Texarkana, to your grandmother's hands pressed to your scalp, to the sound of gunfire outside and whispered prayers inside. Jasmine opened her mouth. No sound. Her hand trembled around the mic. This wasn't a press conference. This was a reckoning. And before the first tear fell, everyone in that Dallas room knew they weren't about to hear a political answer. They were about to hear a testimony. Stay with us, because this wasn't just a question. It was a mirror. Subscribe and stay, because our truth deserves more than sound bites. Jasmine Crockett leaned forward, elbows resting on her knees, her voice softer now, as if trying not to wake a memory. You ask me what God means to me, she said, eyes fixed on the girl in the third row. To answer that, I have to tell you about a hallway, not a church, not a pulpit, a hallway. She let the silence stretch. Then she smiled, not wide, but wistful. I grew up in Texarkana. You ever been there? Probably not. It's small, hot, poor. We didn't have much. No cable. No air conditioning. Sometimes no car. Just me, my little brother, and my mama doing what she could. The room stirred. Heads nodded. A few older women whispered, My mama worked like she was trying to outrun time. Jasmine continued. Nurses aide by day, house cleaner by night. She barely had time to sleep, let alone cook dinner. So we'd eat cereal, rice, beans, whatever we had. But the real glue of our house, that was my grandma, Eula May. She chuckled lightly. Oh Lord, that woman was a force. The audience leaned in. They knew that tone reverence, laced with memory. She only owned 3 house dresses, wore them year-round, like they were designer gowns, could stretch a can of beans like it was Thanksgiving. But what I remember most was her praying. Jasmine's voice dropped every night. Same time, same hallway, between my room and my brother's. She had this old, ugly pillow stuffing, half gone, and she'd kneel on it like it was holy ground. She looked up, eyes glistening. She didn't whisper. No, she talked to God like he owed her rent money. Loud, through the walls. Lord, protect my babies. Give my daughter strength. Let the lights stay on 1 more month. The crowd chuckled knowingly. I used to be embarrassed. Jasmine admitted. Friends would come over and hear her. I turned the radio up, tried to drown her out. I didn't understand it back then. She paused, let the memory settle. But now I know. That voice, those prayers, they weren't noise. They were anchors. Because sometimes the only thing between us and giving up was that woman's voice echoing in the dark. A whoosh fell again. One man in the back crossed his arms tighter. There were nights, Jasmine continued, when we had powdered milk and busted heaters, when the rain came in through the roof and we'd line the floor with pots. Nights, I'd lie in bed thinking, God, are you even real? She looked back at Janelle. But even then, I'd hear her, that hallway prayer, like clockwork. And I swear, even when the house was falling apart, something about her voice made it feel like we were gonna be okay. She chuckled again, wiping her eye with the back of her hand. That's the first thing I thought of when you asked me. Not church pews, not Bible verses. A hallway, A woman on her knees with cracked hands and tired bones, still finding the strength to pray loud. Jasmine sat back for a moment, breath caught in her throat. Faith didn't come to me in Sunday school, she said finally. It came in struggle, in heat, in hunger, in watching a woman believe in something bigger than poverty, than pain. The room was still, no phones out, no fidgeting, just listening. That hallway, Jasmine whispered, taught me that faith isn't about answers. It's about survival, about choosing to believe even when everything tells you not to. She looked back at Janelle, her voice steady, eyes soft. You asked me what God means to me. To me, he's the sound of my grandmother's voice, cutting through the dark like a song, like a shield. Jasmine leaned into the mic again, a voice firmer now, like the truth was rising up her spine. You know what's wild? She said, some of the most defining moments of my faith didn't happen in church. They happened in fear. She looked across the audience, older faces, folded arms, eyes, already holding memories of their own. I remember one summer night I was maybe 11. The kind of Texas heat that sticks to your skin like syrup. I was sitting on the living room floor, folding church fans, while Grandma sat in her chair, rubbing her knees. The television was on, but nobody was watching. She paused, exhaled. Then we heard it. Bang. The room tensed. Gunshot. Loud. Close. She mimicked the sound with a snap of her fingers. Grandma didn't scream, didn't flinch. She just whispered, "Get down, baby." And I dropped right there on that sticky linoleum floor. Another shot followed, then yelling, then tires screeching. She took a breath. When it was over, she stood up calm, walked to the screen door, shut it like she was closing the fridge, locked the deadbolt. Saturday, back down. Several people nodded, slowly. They'd seen that kind of quiet survival before. She looked at me, hands still shaking a little, and said, "Let's pray." And I was mad. I said, "Pray for what? That they don't come back. That next time the bullet misses us again?" Her voice cracked. I was scared, but I was angry, too, because we'd been praying every night, loud, faithful, and still, bullets flew. She paused, lips trembling. I asked her, if God is real, why doesn't he fix this? The silence in the Dallas room was sharp now. Jasmine's voice dropped to a hush. She reached out, grabbed my hand, those sandpaper hands of hers, and said, "Baby, God don't always fix things the way you want. Sometimes he just keeps you from falling all the way down." Heads bowed. Someone whispered, "Amen." I didn't get it back then, Jasmine said. I rolled my eyes, went to bed mad. But that night never left me. She adjusted the mic, voice steady again. Next morning, we heard the boy next door. Marcus had been shot. 17. Just a kid. Wrong place. Wrong time. They thought he was someone else. A soft murmur moved through the crowd. I'd seen him the day before riding his bike shirtless, laughing with his boys. Now he was in a hospital bed, lucky to be alive. She looked out across the audience. And you know what my grandma said? She said, "We gonna thank God for that too." Jasmine shook her head, still half in disbelief. I didn't understand how she could be so grateful with sirens outside and bullet holes in the block. But that night, I stayed awake. I listened through the wall as she prayed, not just for us, but for Marcus, for his mama, for peace. Her voice slowed. That was the first time I didn't roll my eyes, didn't plug my ears. I just listened. She looked at Janelle again. "Baby girl, faith isn't always about getting what you want. Sometimes it's about surviving the nights you don't think you'll get through." A pause. Some folks think prayer is weakness, but where I come from, it's resistance. It's armor. It's the only thing we had when the world forgot about us. The audience was still, but not silent. A few sniffles, a few clenched fists resting on canes. Jasmine smiled gently. That summer changed everything, because I started to see that faith wasn't a guarantee. It was a decision. She looked back at the crowd, and every time we got up after a storm, after a scare, after a gunshot, it wasn't because we were fearless. It was because someone in the house had whispered, "Lord, just hold us together one more day." She let the weight of her words sit with them. That's what faith meant to me back then, she said softly. And to be honest, it still does. Jasmine took a long breath, her fingers tracing the edge of her microphone. I carried that faith with me, she said. Not loud, not perfect, but always there like a hum beneath the noise. She smiled faintly. When I got to college, I thought I was going to be a teacher. Something steady, predictable. But life doesn't care about your plans. She glanced upward, then leaned into the mic. There was this professor, Dr. Hargrove. I got into an argument in class one day. Heated. He pulled me aside afterward and said, "You don't argue to be heard. Jasmine, you argue to change minds." Ever thought about law? She chuckled. I told him, "I'm broke." He looked me dead in the eye and said, "Then change what broke means." The audience laughed warmly. That man planted a seed I didn't even know I needed. She continued, "So I applied to law school in Austin. No backup plan, just grit and a second-hand laptop." The room was quiet again. It wasn't glamorous. I lived in a studio barely bigger than my grandma's hallway. Some nights I studied by flashlight when the lights got cut. I didn't have tutors or study groups. I had ramen and prayer. A few heads nodded. One woman murmured, "Come on now." But that's where I met Mateo Quinlan. She paused. A shadow passed. Her expression, 16, arrested for robbery. No weapon, no prior record, no real evidence. Just a black boy, in the wrong place at the wrong time. Jasmine's voice softened. He sat across from me in that public defender's office. Eyes tired, mouth quiet. I believed them when he said he didn't do it. But belief don't move the system. She shook her head. I stayed up for nights, digging through camera footage, cross-checking witness reports, trying to find something that proved what I already knew, that this child was being swallowed whole. Her voice gained weight, like each word had been earned. I remember standing in front of that judge. My hands were shaking, but my voice held. She looked across the room. I said, "Your Honor, there is no proof. There is no weapon. There is no justice in proceeding." She paused, and he walked free. Soft applause rippled through the audience. Respectful. Jasmine didn't smile. I didn't celebrate. I went home, locked the door. Saturday, on the floor, and cried. She touched her chest. Not from relief, but from rage. A beat. Rage that it almost didn't work. Rage that nobody else had tried. Rage that kids like Mateo fall through cracks no one bothers to fix. The crowd grew still. That night, I didn't pray. I sat in silence, my fists clenched. I didn't know if I believed anymore. She looked up. So I walked, found a little church in East Austin, slipped into the back row like I was sneaking in, stared at the stained glass. Like it might answer me. Her voice grew kid. An older woman slid into the pew beside me. Didn't say a word at first. Then she handed me a tissue and whispered, "You look like someone carrying a heavy bag." Jasmine smiled gently. I told her, "I don't know if I believe anymore." And she said, "Then rest. Baby, faith ain't a sprint. It's something you walk with, even when your legs hurt." Someone in the back whispered, I never saw her again, Jasmine said. But that sentence lives in my bones. She looked at the crowd with new steadiness. I didn't come into politics because I love power. I came because of Mateo, because of that tissue in a pew, because I got tired of waiting for someone else to fix it. Her voice lowered, slower. And if you believe this is what Black America needed all along, say truth in the comments below. She leaned back in her chair, voice clear. Congresswoman Jasmine, latest news may be headlines to some, but to me, it's a promise I made in a courtroom. One I intend to keep. The halls of the United States Congress don't echo like churches. Jasmine said, her voice lower now, eyes scanning the crowd. But Lord, they still feel haunted. A low murmur rippled through the Dallas Community Center. When I first walked into those marbled corridors, fresh oath in hand, I thought I was ready. I'd survived gunshots, powdered milk, law school, and crooked justice. Surely, this wouldn't break me. She paused, letting the room settle into the weight of that assumption. I was wrong. Several heads nodded slow, weary. They knew that kind of disappointment. Capitol Hill ain't built for women like me. Not really. It tolerates us. Smiles politely. Pretends we're guests at a dinner we helped cook but weren't invited to eat. The room hummed. Agreement thick as dust. There were days I'd walk into meetings where folks wouldn't even look up. They'd call me young lady. Or mix up my name. And when I spoke clear, direct. Some would nod, and then pretend I hadn't said a thing. Her jaw clenched slightly. I'd sit in chambers with men who think decorum is just a shield for dismissal. I'd raise points backed by fact, history, and pain, and they'd respond with smirks. The air tightened. But the worst part, she said, it wasn't the noise. It was the loneliness. Jasmine's voice grew smaller. You see the photos? The headlines, Congresswoman Jasmine, latest news, but you don't see the nights, the empty apartment, the unread messages, the echo of a Capitol office where I stayed late just to avoid the silence back home. She adjusted in her seat, took a steadying breath, and then the threats started. Several in the audience leaned forward. Emails, letters, voicemails. One man said, I was a disgrace and should go back to where I came from. Another called me the N-word and said he hoped I'd never come home. A hush dropped like a stone. I didn't tell my mama, didn't tell Eula May. Why worry them? But y'all, it chipped away. She tapped her chest. Not all at once. Just little cracks. Doubt here. Exhaustion there. Wondering if anything I did would ever be enough. She leaned forward. One night, after a brutal debate session, I stayed late at the office. Heels off, hair up, papers everywhere. I was tired in my bones, reading the same bill over and over. Couldn't concentrate, couldn't even cry. She paused, and then I heard a mop bucket roll past my door. A few chuckles soft, curious. It was the janitor, older brother, wore navy blue coveralls. He glanced in and said, You, all right, in there. I forced a smile and said, Just trying to save the world, one bill at a time. He chuckled and said, She mimicked his deep voice. Don't let the weight lie to you. You ain't alone in that room. The audience responded low hums, audible sighs. When I packed up that night, I noticed the sticky note on the edge of my desk. Didn't recognize it at first. But written on it in the neatest handwriting were 6 words. Jasmine held up her fingers. Even the strong get to rest. She let the room breathe. No name, no signature, just that sentence. Her voice softened. I kept that note. It's still in my wallet, right next to a photo of Grandma Eula May. She looked at Janelle again. Baby girl, I learned that faith isn't just about standing tall. It's knowing when to sit down, when to breathe, when to let somebody else mop the floor while you remember why you're fighting. A Pause. A shift in tone. Some folks read about United States Congress latest news like it's gossip, like it's a game. But let me be clear. That place tests your spirit. It don't just ask what you believe, it asks what you bleed for. She sat back, voice calm but unshakable. And me, I plead for justice, for peace, for the kids like Mateo, for the girls like Janelle, for the prayers whispered in hallways too small to echo, but loud enough to carry. She held the silence like a benediction. Jasmine sat forward. Now, not as a politician, not even as a lawyer, just as a woman who'd lived too many lives in one. She looked at Janelle, then back at the crowd. You know what I've come to believe? She asked. Her voice, Keter, that God ain't always loud. Sometimes, he shows up as a whisper. She let that linger. Not a miracle, not a parted sea, just a whisper. When your knees are too tired to kneel, when your voice is too cracked to pray. Her hands rested in her lap. People think strength looks like standing tall, power suits, podiums. But sometimes, strength is just getting up the next day when you didn't think you would. A murmur of knowing rippled across the room. I failed, she said plainly. I voted wrong. I've trusted people I shouldn't. I've let my anger speak before my wisdom could catch up. And I've cried not just in my car or hotel rooms, but in hallways of power. Where you're supposed to be stone, she touched her heart. But through it all, I remember those prayers in our hallway back in Texarkana. That old pillow, that worn-out voice, a pause. I remembered my grandmother's hands on my head when the world felt too heavy. I remembered my mama counting quarters to buy bread and whispering, "We'll make it work. Baby." She exhaled slowly. That is what God means to me. Jasmine looked directly into the rows of brown, lined, and beautiful faces. Faces that had seen decades of joy, war, injustice, church choirs, funerals, and cookouts. To me, God ain't a mystery, she said. He's memory. The room stilled. He's the sound of gospel playing through a cracked speaker on a Sunday morning. He's the feeling of a stranger handing you a napkin when you didn't even know you needed one. He's the reminder that even if the system forgets you, you still matter. She turned to Janelle again. You did that, Jasmine said. You asked something brave, something real. And you reminded me that politics without soul is just noise. Her voice cracked, but she didn't stop. God means I'm not alone. That even when my hands are empty, my heart can still be full. She wiped a tear. I've stood in rooms where my name was ignored, where my pain was politicized, where my voice shook. But every single time, I held on to the whisper. Even the strong get to rest. Jasmine stood slowly, not for applause, but because her story had reached its breath. She took one last look at the girl in the third row, legs swinging, eyes wide, innocence untouched by cynicism. Then to the audience, some days, she said, you will question everything you're worth, your faith, your power. But remember, survival is sacred, and your story is still being written. A soft silence followed. If you felt this story in your chest, drop a comment below. Speak black truth, because someone else needs to see it. She stepped away from the mic, nodded once, and let the room full of saints, skeptics, and survivors sit in the truth of her journey. The applause in that Dallas room wasn't thunderous. It was reverent, like a prayer, said, with open palms and tear-filled eyes. Jasmine sat back down, shoulders eased, heart wide open. And as the people began to stir, some reaching for tissues, others clasping hands, she leaned into the mic one last time. Thank you for letting me tell my truth, she said softly. We live in a world that rewards noise, but sometimes the quietest stories hold the loudest truths. She looked around the room. We don't tell enough stories like these, stories about grandmothers with creaky knees, little girls with brave questions, janitors with wisdom in their hands, and congresswomen who still believe in grace. She smiled, eyes glistening. If this story moved something in your chest, don't scroll past Like, share, stand. She straightened her back. Subscribe. Because they silenced our voices long enough. Let's raise them louder than ever. A pause. This journey ain't just mine. It's yours. It's every black elder who prayed over a child they weren't sure would make it. It's every young voice, still learning how to speak power into a broken world. She pointed gently toward Janelle. That little girl reminded me that sometimes the most powerful faith is the one that simply says, I'm still here. Jasmine's voice dropped into a sacred hush. So tonight, let's not just remember the tears or the speeches. Let's remember the whispers, the ones that held us, the ones that keep holding us still. She stepped away, and as she reached the edge of the stage, she whispered to no one in particular. So what's the latest news on Congresswoman Jasmine? We're still standing. We're still rising. From the back of the room, someone shouted, we rise still. Others echoed, speak black truth. Justice rising. Congress can hear U.S. And as the voices layered, warm and thunderous, Jasmine turned one last time and said, thank you for being here. We'll see you in the next story. The kind they still don't want you to hear.